on.
Hey everybody, We'll Make Creations here, and this is G, filming by myself, trying to get a good view for you guys to watch me bind a whole quilt by machine, both sides at the same time. But first I'm gonna put my label in, so I just put it towards the bottom right. It's just where I prefer to do it. So I'm just gonna stick that in here and just sew that in, and that's it. And now it'll just get put inside my binding. So I am doing this today on my Janome M7 Continental M7 machine. I already have my stitches preset as one of my favorite stitches, so I'm going to go to where it says quilt, and then I'm going to come down here to number 20, and my settings are listed here. So my stitch width is 9, my stitch length is 2.8, and my tension is set at 7.0, and it's on auto for the presser foot. I am using my VD foot here, which is an extra purchase for your M7, and I'm using the swing plate or the zigzag plate that comes on your machine originally that allows the needle to move from left to right. So my binding it starts out at 2 inches. It's folded in half, and then the sides coming in half to meet again. So this ends up to be a 1/2 inch binding, which is a perfect fit for the foot to be, you just ride the edge of the foot along the edge of your binding, and it will make it perfect, and it won't miss the binding. So I'm gonna just start not at the corner. I'm gonna just come down a little bit, probably, I don't know, 13-14 inches or so, and I'm going to fold my binding with my quilt right in the center of my binding. Okay, so, and this whole time all I'll have to do is make sure that the quilt is in the center of my binding. I'm going to put a couple clips to hold this in place, and I'm not going to sew this area. I'm going to start below this clip here. So there's about 6 inches or a hand's worth of length between these two, and I'm not going to sew on that. That's for at the end. So I'm just going to throw my binding over my shoulder, and all I need to worry about is what is right here by my needle. So I just want to make the quilt nice and flat right here while it's going into my needle. This way I'm making sure that nothing has flipped up underneath here and getting caught here. So I will get this in here, and I like to first grab my thread, and I'm going to pull the bobbin thread up to start. So I'm going to needle down and needle back up, hold my quilt in place, and yank on that top thread, grab my hemostats and grab that bottom thread, the bobbin thread, and pull it out, and then push my needle back down. Now I'll be ready to get going. Each time I'm just going to spread my binding, come down with my thumb right here, and put that binding right in the center of my quilt. So the quilt is going right in the folds of that binding. I also like to use my quilting paddle to help me push the quilt more easily through the machine. So basically we're ready to rock and roll, and let's get going. I've got my machine set on the highest speed possible, and really all I'm needing to do is just make sure that my foot stays on the edge of my binding, and I do about 6 inches or so. And here I'm making sure that underneath I'm feeling that my binding is totally, engulfing this, enclosing the quilt. So I straighten it up to a certain point and then hold it with my finger here, or my thumb and finger, and then I'm just gonna push this through until I get to where I know that I've already straightened this and it's all going great on the back. Now I should stop and just make sure my stitches are nice on the back. And this is a very foolproof method I have here, and it is catching all the binding and the stitches look great. So I've perfected this stitch and this way. I've been binding my quilts like this for years. Of course, if you were going to enter your quilt into a quilt show, this is not an acceptable binding for that. But if you are given a quilt that is going to be well loved, this binding is not going anywhere. So basically I get to where my paddle is up here by my foot, and then I'll straighten back out so I'm not in a bad ergonomic position, and then I'm just going to keep putting that quilt in the center of that binding, straighten it out with my fingers, and keep it going. Now I've had people request me doing this binding from start to finish, and so if you're not wanting to watch this step be a monotonous step, and you just want to fast forward till I get to the corners, that's fine. But a lot of people want to see it done in real time. So I decided to turn the camera on, and hopefully you have a good view. I hope my paddle is not in the way. And you're able to see how this is pushing through here. So each time I'm going to straighten my quilt, make sure nothing is going underneath there, and straighten my binding out. Place my fingers, on the top and the bottom, making sure nothing is turned or flipped or anything, and then here we go again. I didn't test to see if my paddle was in the way or not. Hopefully you guys have a good view with my hands and my paddle not being in the way of your view. All right, so we're going to be coming down here on this corner. You can put a clip in it to help you hold it, or you can just hold it with your fingers. Now, before I get to this end, I will push my button, my knotting button, and when the needle is on the left, right before the end, and I'll push my button, and it will make one last turn, it'll go from the left to the right and back to the left and stop in place. If you happen to miss, it's not detrimental, but it makes for a better looking corner. So I'm just going to keep going right here, and I'm going to hold it with just one hand because I can do that because I've got my paddle on my quilt. So as I'm coming down here, I'm just going to really pay attention to the last time that this needle can be to the left and still go one time to the right and then the left and stop at the end of my quilt. So I'm about there right now. So I'm going to push this button that knots the fabric. So it's going to complete the stitch and then it'll stop. And then it'll go in place about 3 or 4 times. And then I'll push my scissor button and it will have knotted the back of that thread. So here is what that looks like. I have variegated thread in here. So you'll be able to see the stitches mostly, except when it's on the dark purple. So hopefully you can see that really good. And I'm not worried about the back because it will absolutely catch the back. And you don't have that funky line of stitching when people stitch their binding to the one part of the quilt and then fold it over to the other side. You always see that awkward line of stitching on there, and that I don't like. So I wanted to make sure I figured out a way not to have that. I had a loose thread there. So there, and my tag got in there nicely. So now we're at this corner, okay? So we've stitched all the way to the end here. I'm gonna hold my thumb and forefinger on this corner here, on this top part of that binding. And I'm gonna stick my right hand thumb in here, in the where the two fabrics, or where the fabrics meet in the middle. I'm gonna put my thumb in here and pull it towards where I'm gonna be going. So we're gonna go turning this corner down this way. So I'm gonna put my thumb in here and pull this down and then fold it over. And then with my fingers, I'm gonna just walk up towards that corner, and you'll see that it makes a nicely mitered corner up here on the front and back. So let me just put a clip in there so I can turn it over and show you. So that's the front and that's the back. Now those two threads that happen when you use your scissor button, cut those off so they don't get in your way. Okay, so we've got our mitered corner there, and we're just gonna come and start this right here in this corner. We'll start the next stitching, okay? So right now I'll prepare my machine to have this corner stuck down in there, okay? So I'm gonna push this through here, and I'm gonna drop my needle down. I'm gonna grab that thread, and when I push my needle up, I'm gonna be bringing that bobbin thread up from the bottom to the top. So I'll push my needle up. I'm holding this very tight so it doesn't move anywhere. I'm gonna grab that bobbin thread from the bottom and then needle down once more. Now it's ready to start coming down this way. Now, because you're on a hump, because that's a thick corner there, you may need to use your hump jumper, which that's what this is. I've got arrows written on mine because I like the thicker side. And I can put this right behind my foot and behind and under my foot. And when this starts taking off, this hump jumper is going to fly out the back, but yet it will keep my stitches going on this thick part. Okay, so I just want to make sure that this is folded over nice. I'm going to feel up here, make sure it's got the quilt inside that corner up there. I'm holding my threads with my paddle, but right now I'm going to start taking off, and that hump jumper will just fly out the back. Now on the M7, every now and then, the back of this will disengage. So if you hear it, you'll hear it. If it comes undone, then you need to stop and push that and make sure that your walking foot feature is happening again. Also, what I did not show is how to override your machine to do a decorative stitch but use the walking foot feature. So and I forgot to do that, and right now I can tell that it's hesitating a little bit. So I am going to go on my machine here and push this circle with these lines in here, okay? And I'm gonna, it says manual dual feed setting. I'm gonna push it on, and that will allow me to use the dual feed feature, walking foot feature, with the decorative stitch. And when you do that, you'll see that your machine will have a much easier time to go through your machine, which I should have done that ahead of time to make my life easier, and I did not. So I'm going to get this hump jumper out of the way because, you know, once you start stitching, it'll shoot out the back, and I just don't want to lose it, so I'll get it out of my way. I'm straightening my quilt back out, make sure there's nothing folded up underneath there, and all I'm worried about is right here, okay? So I'm gonna just stick my thumb in here right along this spine of this binding, and then putting my quilt in there. Now I have serged my quilt, the edges of my quilt. It really helps the binding process. It keeps your quilt nice and pushed down, and you don't have any puffiness to deal with when you are wrapping your binding around your quilt. If you don't have a serger, you could also use any kind of decorative stitch that goes over the edge. You could use a zigzag stitch, a edge stitch, anything to like match your quilt down to where it's mashed down. And it's simple to just get this in here and fold it over. You do not have to have it on the highest speed, but if you know me at all, you know that I love to sew fast, and really all you have to keep track of is having that binding right along the edge of your foot. So this is a very foolproof, easy method to binding your quilts. And I think it's cool as well. And your binding is not going anywhere. So I get to where I've already straightened my binding out, or when my arm is extended, that's not a very comfortable position. So I will reposition. Again, I'm going to make sure that nothing has flipped up underneath. The rest of the quilt hasn't folded up underneath where I'm getting ready to bind. Ask me how I know. So that's a good way to not have a mishap. And we'll just keep it moving. This is a very relaxing process too, because most people cannot stand to bind a quilt. I hear it over and over and over. And for me, it's very relaxing. And I just listen. Normally, I listen to my book while I'm doing this. And it's done before you know it. Now, I have stopped and talked and whatever. But you can usually do a big quilt, you know, absolutely within an hour and a half. Depends what speed you're going on. You could also do this with a straight stitch as well. However, you know, I don't think it's as foolproof. And you know, if you're doing a straight stitch, you might catch it on the front, but what if you didn't catch it on the back, right? So this, it absolutely catches it on the front and back the whole way through. I don't even have to worry about grabbing any part of this to show you, because I know it's right. I know it's good. Now, every now and then you will have to adjust your tension. I've only had to do that recently. I don't know for what reason. I used to put this on a I think 6.8, and now I've done the tension to a 7.0, and this is because I did change it because I was seeing kind of eyelashes on the back of my stitches, and I didn't appreciate that. I do use bottom line thread on the bobbin, and so all my quilts are, you know, you can use them on either side. So I have, you know, the quilts and the binding with the bottom line thread. It's barely noticeable, right? And it goes with anything you've got on the back. So that is one of my foolproof, part of my foolproof method is to use that bottom line thread. I very seldom use anything in my bobbin besides the bottom line. This VD foot, like I said, is an additional purchase for the M7 or your 9mm machines. Make sure if you do get one, you get it for the 9mm because that is what your M7 is. And you don't want to buy the wrong millimeter. These Janome M7s are a 9mm swing, so that means you can have a stitch going up to 9mm on here, which on this 1/2" binding covers it all. Starts out with 2 inches. I'll repeat that. We do have a Simplicity bias tape maker that helps us make our binding so perfectly, and I could not live life without it. Okay, so I'm going to really pay attention. I'm going to hold my paddle here with these fingers, hold my binding down. That way I can reach up here and push my button that knots the fabric, knots the thread. I'm going to do it to when I think I have one swing left to end at the quilt. So I pretty much have it down, but probably because I'm talking about it, I'm going to miss a little bit. So I did miss a little bit. I want to show you that and show you that it'll be okay. Oh, it just happens to be the dark part of the purple thread, so you might not be able to see it. My stitches ended right here instead of right here on the quilt. Okay, that's perfectly fine. I can still form my corner. I'm going to put my thumb in here. I'm going to pull it down towards where we're going to be stitching next. I'm going to walk with my fingers up towards that corner, and there, I'm going to miter my corner without an issue. Like I said, if you're worried about the quilt police in a quilt show or something, then don't use this method. But if you're doing everyday quilts and wanting to get her done, this is definitely the way to do it, in my opinion. I'm going to redo that corner a little bit and have it come down just a little bit more. There we go. So that it's more of a 90-degree angle there, or whatever. So I'm going to keep that still for a minute while I get my thread here. I'm going to push my quilt into here, and I'm going to drop my needle right there where that fabric starts to come down this way. I'm going to needle up, hold my quilt in place, pull that bottom thread up, and grab it with my hemostats and pull it out, needle back down, and then I'm going to put my hump jumper right in the back of there and to where my needle's not going to hit it. I'm not going to push it so far in that my needle's going to hit it. I'm going to put it right there where it just clears the back part of my needle. I'm going to hold my threads. You can hold them with your hands if you don't have a paddle. This quilting paddle obviously has more uses for me than just quilting. So I'm going to check that my quilt is in here correctly again. Roll my fingers down and make sure it is. I'm going to hold it pretty stiff up here to just get this started. And my hump jumper is going to jump out the back part of my machine. And like I said, you will feel if the back part disengages. So you can just reassure yourself to rub your finger back here and make sure that latch is over top of that bar in the back. It is a problem with this machine that it does happen. It doesn't happen all the time, and now that because I'm talking about it, it's not happening. But you can also use a clip to hold on to your fabric or your binding down here if you want, and that way you can concentrate your fingers up here. But I always, either with my thumb or a clip, will kind of mark where I've already felt and made sure nothing was happening on the underneath side, right? So right now I know I could go all the way down to that clip and it will be right. I usually end up repositioning my paddle before I get that far down. So basically, I don't know, I might go 6 or 8 inches. Now see, my arm is extended right here, so this isn't a good position. So I'm gonna move my paddle back down, just make sure this is all nice and flat, making sure nothing's flipped up underneath there. It's the same thing over and over. When you do this, if you just hear me barking at you the same thing over and over, then hopefully you'll be able to enjoy this foolproof method of binding both sides of your quilt at one time and getting her done. If you have any questions for me, you can write it in the below the description box. You can make a comment or have a question for me, and I'll be glad to answer anything that I didn't cover, or if you just need more explanation. All I know is I would have 4 billion quilts if I didn't bind this way, because it's fast, it's easy, and it looks great. And if I had to hand sew a binding on, I wouldn't have not a quilt made. And I make at least 1 quilt a month. A lot of times I make more than that. Plus I make bags and I'm into a lot of different stuff with my sewing. But yeah, if I had to hand do it, I wouldn't have not 1 quilt under my belt. So as you see, a lot of times I'll take my pointer finger and just make sure it's nice, the binding is nice and flat in front of, before it goes into my foot. Just trying to give you an explanation of why I do what I do. And I really hope that you benefit from this video. It's not easy to film yourself. And Sherry is often not at home anymore. She's on a cruise about 90-some% of the time, so I'm learning to film myself. So if you'd like to give me some comments or praise or whatever, just make comments in this video and I will read them. Also, if you've learned something, if you like what I did, please give me a thumbs up and like and subscribe and share to all your quilting friends, especially if you have a friend that hates to do their binding. Maybe this will be their saving grace. As you see, I'm not worried about the rest of my quilt. I'm only worried about what's right here. So One mistake I did make on this one is I didn't cut my quilt a 1/4 inch from my points on the edges. So my binding is covering up some of my points. But it was too little too late when I realized that. So, you know, if you don't want to do that, make sure you cut your quilts a 1/4 inch away from any of your points. I did, as you see, serged my edges, and so you don't have to worry about just clipping the thread because it's getting covered by the binding anyway. So I really hope that if you give this a try that you'll comment on this video and let me know. I would love to know that someone benefited from this and that you are now binding all those quilts that you have stored away that you don't want to bind. So I'm going to get my machine ready and I'm going to push it, and then it's going to end at the end of my quilt. Because if you push it when the needle's on the left, it's going to go to the right once and back to the left, and then it's going to stop. So we're going to cut that off. We'll cut off the 2 threads that happen on the back when you use your scissors button. And we're going to just arrange this to where we can get this in front of us. I'll get my hump jumper that flew out the back there. And I'm going to hold this with my thumb and forefinger tight right here to the edge of the quilt. Run my thumb down the spine of this binding all the way down to here, and I'll fold it over. I got really lucky that this join of the binding didn't happen up in the corner. Sometimes that will happen. You can audition your binding if you'd like. You could even glue it down if you want to. I've done that before too. But for me, it's just an extra step, and I'd rather just get her done. So if you don't like the way your corner looks, just redo it. Before you sew it on, I mean. If you have to take out binding stitches, this stitch, it's not fun. So do a little test to make sure your tension's right. But if you use these settings, I almost guarantee they'll be all right. And yeah, so now we're down on this corner and doing the same thing what we just did. I'm just making sure nothing is underneath where I'm going to be binding, right? So I'm going to grab this thread underneath here, push my quilt to where that corner, I'm pushing my needle down right in that corner as best I can and needle back up. Hold it very stiff so when I pull this, the quilt doesn't move. And I'm going to grab my bottom thread, my bobbin thread, and I'm going to push my needle back down. And now I'm going to pull these threads out of the way. I'm going to set my hump jumper in the back of here so it doesn't struggle at all to get over that folded corner area. If you want to see what the corner looks like up close at this point, is that hopefully that's showing you right where I started in the corner here, and you've got your 2 threads that you're going to bury later. But this provides you a nice clean stitch in the back. There's no rat's nest there. So we've got our hump jumper in there ready to go. We've made sure our quilt is in the right spot inside our binding. We're holding our threads out to the side, and we will go a few stitches until that hump jumper jumps out, and then we'll just start arranging and rearranging and get this quilt going down this way now. We're coming up on the seam of where I joined my binding, which is not a problem either. like I said, if the lever in the back has disengaged, when you come across where your binding has been joined, or that corner that's thicker, it's not going to go over it as good and seamlessly. So so just when you get started, just make sure that that lever has engaged into the back. So if you have an M7, I hope you learned today that you can override the dual feed feature for your decorative stitches, providing you have the right foot in there and the right plate. And I do have more tips and tricks on the M7, more videos on here. We have an M7 playlist that will show you a bunch of stuff for the M7. This can be done on other machines too. It doesn't have to be an M7. I just happen to be sewing on my M7, and that's why I provided my settings for those of you who have the M7 and would like to do exactly like this. If you don't have an M7, try it on your machine, figure out your settings, and if it doesn't have a way to save your favorite stitch, take a picture of it and save it as a note in your phone. This way you can go right back to the correct settings the next time you want to do a binding on a quilt. So here I'm arranging my quilt. Now this is getting a little too close for comfort underneath here, so I'm going to push that away. Make sure this is nice and flat, and keep it going. Like I said, when you get in any type of ergonomic position and know what it feels like, then you know when you're getting out of whack that you need to reposition and start over. If you do that, you will have a lot less back, neck, shoulder, and all that pain. And if you don't have a quilting paddle to help you along with this, maybe you should get one. And if you don't want to get one, use gloves or whatever. Normally, I also put hospital gloves on as well. I don't particularly like to feel the fabric. Like a lot of people like to feel and pet around on fabric, and I do not. So whatever makes you the most comfortable, figure that out and do it. Listen to music. Like I said, this is very monotonous, and you know, it don't take much thought, so you could listen to your books on tape or whatever you want to call that, audio books, and or rock out to your music. I know a lot of people free motion quilt to music. They get a rhythm that way. I mostly just listen to my books. Here again, I'm making sure nothing's underneath my quilt. As you probably noticed, I hold my paddle in many different ways during the process. I'm sure I haven't been paying attention to that, but I just do what's comfortable for me at the time. Now I've got my paddle past my foot, so I'm going to arrange. All right, so we are going to be coming up on the last corner before we come to meet where we started the quilt. So I'm going to show you what we're going to do. It's a little different for the last corner, okay? well, it's different for a few minutes. But I'll show you when we get down here. Okay, making sure this is all the way in here. I am going to get a drink, and thank you. I couldn't reach it. Oh, I hit the camera. Is it okay? Oh, I was dying of thirst. All right, here we go. So we're coming down on this last corner. We will finish it off the way we've done on all the corners. So remember, I'm going to push my button when my needle was on the left-hand side, or I was almost to the end, so I pushed it right when it was at the right, and I pushed it and it stopped because it finished that stitch. You can also do it that way as well. I normally like to push it before getting to the end, but you can figure out your rhythm for that, to figure out where to stop. Okay, so I cut those 2 threads off that happen when you use your scissor button, and I want to show you this. All right, so this is where we, I had 2 clips here, right? And then I started underneath this. So this right here is not stitched, right? Okay. Now, we are going to form our corner up here, just like if we were going to stick it in our machine, but we're not. We're going to form the corner. I'm going to put some clips here to hold it in place. Okay. And I'm going to come down a little bit and hold this in place. Okay. And I'm going to keep coming down to where I'm going to meet this where we started. Okay, so I'm going to come down a little bit more, clip it. This is just so I can get the correct measurement. With this is a measuring gauge. I'm going to take the part that has a 1/2 inch right here. You can measure it however you want, but this is the easiest way for me, okay? So I'm going to take my binding, and I'm going to make sure this is on here nice and taut. Okay. Now, I want to bring this across where this has started. So I'm coming down like this. I'm coming down to meet where I first started. So I'm going to come and make sure it goes on top of that. All right. Move that down a little bit. Now, so underneath this is my binding here, okay? I'm going to measure a 1/2 inch on this, on the top. This is the top piece here. I'm measuring where it stopped underneath, and I'm measuring a 1/2 inch. So you can take a pen and just measure this, mark it to where you can see it. I don't know if on this you could see that marking. And I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut with this blade just to the left of that marking. So when I cut it off, the marking is on this piece that I have excess of, okay? So I'm going to put this away. Now, how do we join this? Okay, right now while we're thinking about it, we are going to go to our straight stitch on our machine, whatever number you have it as your straight stitch, because from this, I push number 1, the number 1 on the sewing utility here. And my needle is a 1/4 inch from the edge of this foot at this moment because I pushed that number 1 button. So I am going to take this part that's coming down and take this part that's going up, and I'm going to match the spines together, okay? And you can loosen some of these so it can be more pliable for you. If you want, you can even clip this so it stays like out of your way, like this. However you need to do it. But so let me show you again. We're coming down with this piece and this is coming up. So we're gonna turn it and face these spines of this binding together. We're gonna match those spines up. We're gonna open this up and we are going to take a pin and hold it in place for us, okay? I just kind of, kind of thread it through there, okay? So my whole point right now is to be able to put that underneath my needle and sew a straight stitch, right? I'm gonna put this underneath here and sew a straight stitch. I usually don't even do this. I'm just trying to do it to keep it away so you guys can see. So I've got this paired up here. I'm gonna put it in my machine and I'm gonna sew a 1/4 inch and I'm gonna start it and just back it up a little bit. Now because we have that swing plate, sometimes your fabric is gonna suck down into there, so I suggest not doing it at the very edge. Come in a little bit and then I just do a little back up there. Cut it off and immediately I'm gonna go back to my binding stitch, because if I don't, I'm gonna start off like a bat out of hell and not have the right stitch going. So I'm gonna push this scrolly looking thing here and I'm gonna push quilt and I'm gonna go to stitch number 20 and that is where I have my settings set up. 9 is the width, 2.8 is the length, 7.0 is the tension, and I've got it on auto for the presser foot. So I'm going to take that pin out of there. I'm going to open this up, and with my fingers I'm going to press this seam out, okay? Just with my fingernail, I'm going to just finger press that, and I'm going to fold it down to follow what it was doing before I did all that, okay? So now it matches right up in the middle there. You can even straighten it out with or crease it with your fingernail. Okay, so now you can take your quilt and stretch it back out, and now you will see that this is going to match up all the way down here to where you got started. So I normally right now will go ahead and tuck my threads in. This is where we very first started our bonding. These 2 threads, I'm going to tuck those in because I don't want them to get caught up in my stitches there and make a mess. So I'm gonna make a knot in that and travel it all the way down to the fabric, and then I'm gonna put my self-threading needle, I'm gonna thread it, and then I'm just gonna push this knot through down the spine. I'm gonna pull it out, and then I'm gonna clip that off, and no one will even know that was ever there. So pull it a little bit. When you snip it, it'll go into the fabric and no one will even know it was there. So my goal when I come down through here is to match back up with those stitches. And that's why it's important to know when to stop your machine and when it's gonna make a full pattern, because since this pattern starts on the left, I'm gonna try to make it end just like I do at the corners of when I'm coming down to a corner. I'm gonna try to make this stop and stop right here where these stitches end. Now that's easier said than done. Sometimes you'll make it right on the mark and sometimes you won't, but believe me, it'll not be noticeable if I don't match that up. So just doing that as a disclaimer in case it happens. All right, so now we're going to just get all this out of our way again. I'm going to just look at this corner and see if I like the way I did it. Okay, now I'm going to put this in here and try to make it to where my needle is going to go right in the corner where that starts. I'm going to hold my thread and needle up, hold my quilt so it doesn't move, yank on that top thread to get that bottom thread to come up, pull it out, put your needle back down, put your hump jumper in, and pull your threads off to the side and either hold them or use your paddle to hold them. And now we're just going to concentrate on getting the first few stitches. The hump jumper's going to jump out, and we'll move all this other stuff out of our way. And we'll get going to the end of this quilt. So here we go. I kind of hold my fingers firmly. I'm going to get this out of the way and just reposition, make sure everything's good. I don't put a lot of clips except for this last bit, and normally I don't do that. I did it to show you guys that it would fit, that it would go right back on here the way it's supposed to. So I'm just rearranging again. I'm going to take all these off except for where my stitches start. I usually will take a red clip, but I don't have one right here. But this pink clip lets me know that that's where my stitches started. I usually, like I said, will have a red one. That means stop and pay attention. So I can't remember the size of this quilt. Let me see if I have it written down in my notes. This is my August or September raffle quilt, and I don't have the measurement written down, how big it is, but I want to say it's probably 55, 60 inches square or something. And you'll see that it didn't take very long to bind this whole big quilt. Oh, and normally I don't like to have my foot raising up when I stop. Now, this has a little flip-a-tois here, which means a little mess up, because I should have had my foot staying down when I stopped. And when I was arranging, it got out of whack a little bit right here. So that doesn't make me happy, but it's not bad enough for me to take it out. But I've got my button pushed now to where when I'm arranging, my foot stays still on my binding. I'm kind of glad that happened, so it would remind me to tell you guys, when you're doing this, it's better to have your foot down than to have it raising up when you stop. Okay? So everything happens for a reason, right? So we're going to be coming down on this where we first started, right? And my stitches are right here. So, yeah, I got a little bit of a pleat that's happening. Okay, so I am going to push this under here real good, and I'm really got an eye on where I started my stitching. I'm pushing with my hand onto my paddle and holding this still, and I'm gonna come here and I'll push to end it, and we'll see how close we got to joining those stitches exactly. Okay, well, as you can see, I don't know if you can see, I will get up and go really close to the camera. I literally did a perfect join there, which I'm surprised because, you know, when you're filming. So however long this video is, that's how long it took to do this big quilt. I'm going to show you really up close these stitches. Let's see. Right here's where they end. This is where I had started. Boom, 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 down through here. And this is where it ended. So it literally ended and started in the same spot. I got pretty lucky. That doesn't happen all the time. So in less than an hour, we just bonded or bound a whole quilt, front to back. But I am going to show you how to bury your threads on these corners. It's the same as when you buried the beginnings. I just make a knot in my thread and I put my needle in the knot and ride it down to the fabric, and then I thread the needle. This is a self-threading needle. I'll thread it in here and then just shove this up through here to hide the threads and poke it out. Pull this all the way out. Wow. I can't see. I got it too far away from me. And I'm going to pull the threads a little bit and snip it. Okay? And then you don't see where the threads were. So I'm going to do that for all of these corners. I guess I'll just keep it rolling while I do that. It's important when you start off to have enough thread to not have to play with fire when you're trying to knot this and get it out of your way. So here again, I'm putting my needle in that knot. I'm going to ride it all the way down to the fabric. I'll thread the needle by pushing on this self-threading needle, both threads. And I'm going to poke it in about where it came out at and just send it through to where I can make a nice cut. Pull it, snip it, give it a little scratchy scratch, and you won't see where it was. Front and back look great. Let's see. And when you're doing this, you're thinking, man, how many corners does this thing have? Here again, same thing. If you're really worried about this corner like sticking up a little bit, you can absolutely thread it through and, you know, carefully poke it, and then when you pull it through, it'll tack it down a little bit. You could also go back and tack them down if that's bothering you. But for me, it's awesome. Here's another corner. I don't know how many corners we've done already, but in a minute we will look and see if we have any corners left to do. Okay, pull that thread, snip it, give it a little scratchy scratch, and it'll hide where you pulled that thread through. So we've got two corners here done, and here's another corner, and we got one more somewhere. Okay, so we've buried all of our threads, and this quilt is completely finished. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and please like, share, comment, subscribe to our channel, and hopefully we will be putting out more content in the future. So thank you so much and have a great day.